Hi, and welcome to AmalgamNation presents World of Fictioncraft, the Northrend Chronicles, Chapter 6, Bitter Truths. The attack took place a couple of hours before dawn. Swarming from the west, seemingly organised hordes of corpses, dire creatures and monsters fell upon the makeshift camp at Light's Hope Chapel. Rindon had barely slept, rising to his feet and donning his unpolished armour over unwashed padding to the sound of the warning calls. Sheathing his sword, he joined the gathering crowd to the entrance of the camp. A large ragged mass was moving towards them, and in the dark they had the advantage. The High Lord was visible atop a stack of boxes, encouraging the men and women standing before him. All sorts of races, from small gnomes to towering trolls, listened in with fierce attentiveness. The rabble of Scourge were getting louder, ever closer. Everyone was on edge, scarcely recovered from the fight days ago. Fordring was barely into his speech when the first clashes of blade and flesh was heard, then the screams. At that the crowds dissipated and war was on. Rindon charged forward to the front lines, never cowering from the fight. His blade flashed like so many of his comrades did in the scattered torchlight behind him. He caught glimpses of faces he recognised, thrust in the sea of monstrosities assaulting them. Black blood and dirt painted the air, as sword ripped through rotted flesh, as blades dismembered heads from shoulders, as claws tore open torsos to the sounds of agonising screams. He ducked and swerved, slicing his blade clean through dead bone and sinew. He grabbed a soldier, thrusting him behind, barking at him to get to the healers. The troll's forearm lay on the earth. A grotesque bellow was heard, and large gruesome horrors carved paths wielding rusted axes, chains rattling at their limbs. Barely pausing to be disgusted, Rindon made for the beasts, calling on the light for aid in fighting the scourge plague assaulting his brethren. Walden was there, cutting in and out, daggers sharp-tipped and dripping in poisons. Keenly and deftly he was slicing slowly at the slow beast's legs and arms until it was rendered useless. Rindon drove his sword, his extension of his own being, straight into the chest of the nightmare, and it dropped ungraciously, twitching a moment before belching its death. Meeting Walden's eyes, he gave a grateful nod and moved on to the next enemy. They were never ending. Sunrise drew nigh as the light behind the hills grew bright. Scourge was dwindling down to the last few, the Argent Dawn also suffering its own casualties. Rindon's legs were shaking as he plunged his blade into the back of a ghoul fiend, the body dropping stone dead at his feet, finally stilled. He tried to catch his breath, observing the scene around him. At the far outskirts of the battlefield, he had a large overview of the conclusion of the attack. The ground was littered with atrocities and friends alike. Bright tabards, a gruesome contrast to the fetid presence of their attackers. His own tabard was spattered with blood, both his own and kinsmen. Pale skin and lifeless eyes searching the skies were all that remained of the fallen ebony blades who had rushed to the Dawn's aid from their fortress on high. Other Death Knights stood still as statues, observing the scene like him and his own companions. He swallowed back some bile. There seemed to be no more to kill. They had beaten them back. His head hit the ground with such a force, Rindon saw stars. Clutching his skull, he felt the point of a blade tip touch the back of his uncovered neck, his short brown hair matted with blood, leaving it exposed. Perfect. At least I'll get one of you before I die. A hollow voice reminiscent of those the Dawn now allied with said. Glancing over his shoulder from his position on the ground, Rindon's bleary vision looked into the blue eyes of a man gone mad. It was a Death Knight. The blade was raised into the air. His own was now out of arm's reach. Die, you piece of filth. Rindon tried to roll away, but his body wouldn't listen. In that split moment he saw his sisters, his parents and friends all before him, crying. He heard the sword drawing closer, about to deliver his death blow. Arg! The sword didn't make contact, and Rindon saw why. Another person had jumped into the fray, knocking the knight aside. She was lithe and fast, deadly and calculating. Her hands bore two swords of uneven length, gleaming in the newly risen sunlight. Black blood flew high and arced overhead, cries of anguish as each cut went deeper and further into his body. Her white hair was gathered behind her head, but he knew only one person it could be. Her assault never wavered in its tempo. His screams grew to a crescendo. She was terrifying to witness. And then she finished him off, not even a coup de grace. She sliced him clean through the stomach and he collapsed to the floor, jerking unnaturally as his unlife faded. She watched on, her back to Rendon, swords hanging casually from her small hands. He gasped for breath. He could not draw, his eyes wide and pleading, gagging on black liquid frothing from his throat and mouth. She did nothing, and then he died. Bending down, she thrust her swords into his body and wiped her hands on his cloak. She turned to look at Rendon, and he choked. Her eyes were no longer the pale, blind-seeming orbs he had seen yesterday. These were the blue-tinged eyes of a champion of artists. Her expression was stoic and calm, uncaring about the kill she had just made. She had saved his life, and she thought nothing of it, more like she simply enjoyed the kill. She was transformed. This was what the Dawn had fought only days ago. These cold, merciless, icy beings. They were uncaring or unfeeling about death. It was their nature, and they were death's hands. She approached him. No, she went for something near him. It was an axe, a heavy dual-bladed axe, discarded by some unfortunate victim, no doubt. Picking it up with ease, the blade was soon swung in a gruesome curve straight through the deceased attacker. Another blow to his leg, his arms, his chest, his face. Rendon could do nothing but look on with morbid fascination and horror. Soon nothing but gore and bloodied innards lay in its wake, the outline of a corpse no longer distinguishable. The head lay feet away, the origins of her dead namesake were now clearly evident in a pool of carnage. The offending weapon was unceremoniously dumped on the plagued terrain, and then she walked away. That better be the last fray we have, otherwise my healers will drop dead on their feet, the poor wee souls. Tal was bustling about, her white smock tattered and splattered with all sorts. Rendon cradled his head. It was still pounding from earlier. A healing draught had been administered, and he was just waiting for it to take effect. Indeed, I do not think that even your tea can keep me awake for much longer. Lorik, the blue-skinned Draenei, had walked by the bed, carrying a box of what could be assumed to be medical supplies. His accent was thick and his words slurred with tiredness. Rendon didn't blame him. He'd been on duty through the night as well, before the battle. Talia stopped her work and stood in front of him, her eyes level with his while he sat. Oh, you should know that the two healers I sent to see the girl 2 nights ago, well, one of them is speaking now. Her face grew withdrawn. Rendon didn't like that expression on her. They peered into her mind, it would seem. Being priest, I thought that the best course of action after what you described to me. She dropped her voice low, leaning in. He rambles about horrifying and terrible things, Dan. Whatever they saw in her head, I dread to think what it was like for her to witness them. I'm a little glad she doesn't remember it. They looked at each other meaningfully, the weight of her words resting on his mind. He nodded, and in doing so caught a sharp pain to the back of his head. He grasped his neck. Right, you. Off you go to bed and sleep that off. You're lucky not to have a concussion, or you'd be staying here. Talia was not a force to be reckoned with, and so the elf drew up tall, almost twice her height, and bowed dramatically. She laughed. Ach, you're a cheeky lad. Remind me on me own. Now off to bed. Smiling, Rendon walked past the now filled cots and left the tent, gingerly moving as he did. Aching all over, a large hand clutching bruised ribs, he walked to his tent, replaying the moment in his mind he had seen her fight, and then Tal's word on top of that. He couldn't help but think at what kind of evils and terrors that Death Knight girl had seen, or perhaps even done. Was she really in her right mind the past 3 years? Thinking back to the battlefield, he thought she looked possessed, consumed by something out of her control. The captain wasn't sure if he should pity her or be afraid of her. Such was her actions, like nothing he had witnessed before. He stopped walking. The subject of his thoughts was standing next to a dead campfire, empty boxes surrounding it, some toppled from the panic of the night before. Her hair was mostly fallen out of her tie, dangling limp around her face, and she just stared into the fire pit, unhearing or unseeing. Drawing a deep breath, he moved towards her and sat on a crate opposite her. Her eyes were no longer blue. Whatever frenzy was possessed her earlier had now dissipated. Her detonite mien alongside it. She made no note of his presence, much like the first time they had met. He became wary, his nerves still shaken up from a few hours ago, fixing his eyes on a black charred piece of firewood. He carefully said his next words. Listen, I wanted to thank. I can't seem to get warm. He cut off, staring at her. Her face gave nothing away that she had spoken, but he was sure she had. She was still filthy and blood-ridden. It was almost as if the colour was drawn to her, desperate to die and claim her. What? Her gaze fitted to his, holding him there. The wind blew her ghostly tendrils around her gaunt face. For a moment he saw a flash of someone else. I can't get warm. The fires. I can't feel them. Her voice was a ragged whisper, begging, pleading for something she couldn't have, for something so basic. For the first time in their brief acquaintance, Ryndon saw the girl that Walden had spoken about. She was indeed young, now raped of her innocence and forced into horrors no one should bear witness to or act on. But he also saw the cold killer that had saved his life only that morning, that butchered and decimated the remains of the enemy unnecessarily. There was never any honour in what she had done. It was for the simple pleasure of doing so. Comparing the two different sides, he wasn't sure which was the one that was her true self now. He feared for his friend's sanity regarding this girl if her humanity ever became truly lost, and he wasn't sure if she wasn't already too far gone. Looking into her near white eyes, seeing her turmoil and pain, he had never felt so torn. 2 days after the battle for Light's Hope Chapel, early evening. I didn't attend the morning service. It would be rude and near blasphemous to attend something so holy, especially when I was an atrocity, standing as the most opposite of everything the Dawn fought for. No, I would not burden them with my presence. They needed to grieve for their dead, a number which had grown a fraction in the aftermath of the Scourge onslaught. It was now late afternoon. The corpses had been gathered, both the knights and the Dawn checking each broken body for the sign of a pulse. I remembered fighting, the weight of the blades as Deathweaver pushed the hilts into my hands, barking to get out there. I had barely stepped onto the field before an uncontrollable desire for death had overwhelmed me. I was in control enough, it seemed, to determine friend from foe. My hands and feet moved of their own accord, dancing a deadly step to an unheard beat, paving a way through a river of blood. I had chosen my alliance on that field, not that there had truly been a question of it. I had not met this artist in any of my memory. This supposed king I was to have sworn fealty to. I was not myself, Talia had said. She may have been right. By slaying the renegade knight on the field, I had shown my standings, who I sided with. Scoffing, I looked down to the camp. I was sitting away out in an abandoned logging camp, it seemed. The Ebon Blade had not extended an offer to me to join their ranks, and I had not sought one out. By saving the elf, my duty was sworn to the Dawn, not out of any holy revelation, but because I needed penance. I still heard dying screams, watched as tears of dread fall from life-leeched eyes. My mind would not let me have peace. I had killed more than 2 men. I had killed an innumerable amount. I could never be forgiven this. A soft resonance could be heard. Leaning against the rotted wooden pillar, I closed my eyes and listened. A hymn. I hummed along as it grew louder, but remaining just as reverent. It fell and rose, wept and became overjoyed. A song of lament. Yes, I remember it clearly, all the words coming to me as easy as, well, breathing to a living being might. The words were discomfortingly familiar, even if where I learnt them was unknown to me. Kersey? Opening my eyes, I saw Mort slouching towards me. His shirt and trousers were flawless, dressed with a leather waistcoat and daggers sheathed at his belt. He was the healthiest looking undead she had seen at the camp, out of the small handful that resided there anyway. I knew that I knew him. My mind would occasionally throw random images of him to me, like a teacher would a child learning new words. I found his presence a small comfort in the raging tempest I was now mentally waging. If there was one thing that made sense in this confusion, it was someone from my past. He kneeled beside me, face full of concern. "What are you doing out here, little girl?" His tone was as inquisitive as a pit bull seeking meat. Not concern then, annoyance. It felt familiar. "You shouldn't be out here after today." I cocked an eyebrow and asked him his own question. His face contorted into something akin to a grimace. The visible skin on him was still intact, even if it had a dead hue to it. He didn't differ much now from the small, dreamlike flashbacks I witnessed. His hair seemed mostly down, though, in my recollections, whereas now it was mostly kept in a tie. "I'm coming to get satisfaction. 3 death knights are to be executed after the service, and I intend to get a front row seat." His voice didn't hide the disdain towards my former soldiers. I didn't take offence. What right had I to be offended? I stood up, not caring that my already dirty clothes were now covered in dust. "Well then, let's go get a good view." Thank you for listening. I'm not sure if I said this before. I remember recording something in which I said this before, but I can't remember if I actually uploaded that particular one. But I just want to say that from now until the 10th of January, there will be no new game-related vids other than the World of Lorecraft series, unless I do a bonus vid or something like that. But every Sunday from now until the 10th of January, and including the 10th of January, I will be doing World of Fictioncraft, the Northrend Chronicles, each week until the 10th of January and inclusive of the 10th of January. So for anybody that enjoys these World of Fictioncraft vids, that's good news for you guys. It gives me a break from having to find a new game that I'm in the mood of playing and doing a informational vid on it. So yes, I'm being lazy, but at the same time, it's Christmas. I need to relax a little bit more over Christmas. I want to eat turkey and sit on my fat ass and play games for the enjoyment of it. So I'm going to leave this here. As always, remember, play to game and game to play.